What Once Was Mine, Chapter 26, Rapunzel. Somehow the woods grew darker. Rapunzel looked around in wonder and confusion. Pools of blackness gathered under trees and around bushes first, almost as if they were attracted to places where shadows would normally congregate in daylight. Perhaps it was creepy or scary. Certainly Flynn looked nonplussed by whatever silent thing was happening around him. Moths, large and white, were fluttering in a manner just a little too bat-like, came out of hiding to revel in this unexpected dismissal of day. So too did fireflies. Rapunzel squealed in delight when, like tiny candles, they twinkled in slow, unhurried loops around grass. "Is this your mother's magic?" she shrieked, clawing at Gina's arms. "Are those fairies?" "No, those are lightning bugs, Princess," Flynn said with a sigh. "Insects, whose butts glow." "Right, I'm not an idiot," Rapunzel said, trying to get one to land on her. "Because in real life, fairies aren't real, but witches are." "Touché," he said good-naturally, with a bow. Rapunzel left her chest flutter. Yellow eyes peeked out of the darkness from branches or unseen resting spots. An owl called. A spiderweb the size of a quilt, suggesting an owner the size of a dog, hung across a side path. Gina ducked under it, brushing strands out of her hair. "How do you know where we're going?" Flynn asked. "Actually, where are we going? None of this looks familiar to me." "It's not so much where we're going as how we're going," Gina admitted. "I don't get any of it myself. I never paid attention. It was all so boring. But, like I told you, no one can find my mom if she doesn't want to be found." She gestured smugly. The tiny cobweb-covered trail broadened out and led to a green valley in the middle of which sat a perfect little cottage. Rapunzel almost squealed again in delight. The house was squashed like a mushroom by a thatched roof that hung far out over the walls. A pair of windows sparkled on either side of the rounded, heavy wooden door. There was nothing particularly creepy or witch-ish about it at all, except for maybe some leeks that grew on the roof, around the higgledy-piggledy chimney, out of which wafted a lovely, homey-smelling smoke. Next to the cottage was a small fenced-in kitchen garden, and even in the low light Rapunzel could see it wasn't given over just to herbs and vegetables. Tall rockets of flowers and pretty feathery foliage shot colorfully out of the corners. There was even a neat flagstone path that led up to the front door. "Witch?" Flynn asked, skeptical. "Or like crunchy Mother Earth type who drinks herbal teas and pretends the goddess speaks to her?" Gina hit him. As Flynn distractedly rubbed his arm, Rapunzel wondered, was this really a professional or personal rivalry, or was there something else? She felt a pout beginning to form on her lips, and marveled at this development. In the flattering orange light from the cottage, Flynn looked even more dashing than usual. Then a hot, strange breath blew on her neck. She whirled around in surprise, and saw to her horror that the devil himself was facing her. Square pupils set the wrong way, a black widow's peak that arched menacingly, long, swirled, deadly horns. Rapunzel opened her mouth to scream. "Ah, did you miss me, boy?" Gina cooed, butting the creature's horns with the palm of her hands. As they struggled in the path glow of the cottage, the scene reset itself. Rapunzel saw her friend wrestling a large, warm animal who occasionally paused his playing to nose in her pockets to see if she had anything good to eat in there. "That's normal," Flynn said. "A pet goat. Totally normal. Why have a dog? I mean, that would be weird. And a cat would just be jejune for a witch. Am I right?" Rapunzel inched around the animal, dying to hug it and stroke its long, silky hair that wasn't entirely unlike hers. But it was still large, and her fear hadn't entirely subsided, despite its now harmless, slightly unfocused look and bucolic cud chewing. "We have a whole herd of Angoras," Gina said. "Dodger's just the friendliest. Now behave." But whatever she was talking to Dodger or Flynn was unclear. She threw open the front door of the cottage and shouted as if it were a giant house and her mother were in the upper reaches of the third floor somewhere. "Mom, home. I brought some friends with me." "After you, my lady," Flynn said, throwing his arm out chivalrously. Rapunzel stepped into the witch's hut, sort of wishing he could hold his hand. Inside was a wonder. The ceiling was entirely obscured by bunches of herbs, flowers, and sweet rushes hanging to dry. Shelves lined every square inch of wall, filled with bottles of potions, salves, and powders of all colors. A friendly fire blazed out of a flagstone hearth. Farthest away from this, in the back where it was cooler, was a dairy pantry filled with cheese, milk, and butter. All goat, probably. Growing through the window was a healthy spray of roses that looked like a neighbor poking her head in for news and a good gossip. If this was a witch's hut, it was unlike anyone Rapunzel had ever read about. And the witch. A tiny old lady sat in a comfortable chair next to the fire, her bare feet stretched out close to the flames, toes spread. Her dress was whitish, her apron whitish, the shawl around her shoulders whitish. Her hair was silver, which at first made Rapunzel start and gasp in hope. But as the little old lady turned to face them, she saw it was markedly different than her own. It was coarser and frizzier, and while it was long and done up in coils around the witch's head, it wasn't a 20th of length of Rapunzel's. Her cheeks were plump and pink at the apples from the fire. Her eyes were a startling blueberry color. "Sorry for dropping in on you with guests like this, Ma," Gina said, going over and kissing her mother perfunctorily. "It will be a sad day indeed when I'm not prepared for the gracious return of my loving daughter, or the fact that she dragged along friends," the woman replied a little dramatically. Gina rolled her eyes and pointed at the tiny kitchen table. "She knew you were coming already." Indeed, 4 places were already set on the table, 4 bowls, 4 mugs, and 4 spoons. Oddly, 3 were wooden, 1 metal. Cloth-lined baskets contained cheese and bread, and there were small crocks of honey and butter. A dainty pot of pickled mushrooms and green onions served as condiments. "Whoa," Flynn said, for once taken aback. Rapunzel was confused, but not by the apparent predictive powers of the old lady. She was more intrigued by how this mother and daughter were speaking, very casually, almost instinctively to each other. But it wasn't really. Their exchanges both felt eternal and rehearsed, like something they acted out so often that it was almost a puppet show of reality. Underneath the surface there was a depth of familiarity, full of warmth and love. Like the words themselves were unimportant. They were said only for the sake of anyone around who was listening, and didn't actually communicate the real and necessary things that lay underneath. Rapunzel and Gothel never spoke to each other this way. Well, Gothel was a little insulting and disparading, but that was different. And they were always telling each other how much they loved each other. She couldn't imagine how these two saying, "I love you more and I love you most." "I'm just glad you have friends, and decent ones it looks like, for a change. Oh!" Suddenly the woman saw Rapunzel clearly, as if she had moved a little to the firelight, or a shadow had fallen from her face. "Oh, dear girl, that's a fine head of hair you have there," she whispered. Rapunzel felt herself blushing. If she were naked, as if Gina's mother could see something inside her, the good wife rose from her chair with the help of a cane made from a gnarled root. But not with the difficulty Rapunzel imagined. She reached out a hand. "No, don't touch it," Rapunzel hissed, stepping backward. "It could kill you." "Nonsense," the old woman said, and just like that, she grabbed a lock and pulled it through her fingers. Rapunzel tried to imagine calm things, the bluest sky with puffy clouds out her tower window, lazy afternoons when she dreamed and watched her mobile spin, the morning after a night's snow when everything was silent and muffled. Gina grinned. "Told you my mom could handle this." "Oh, this is indeed a strange and powerful magic you have here, caught in your tresses." Unthinkingly, the old woman combed her fingers through a tangled strand and adjusted a charm. "What sort of things do you do with it?" She asked the question with calm curiosity, and then patted the hair back in place, as if it were nothing more than a farming tool. "Do with it?" Rapunzel asked a little darkly. "I tried to bind it up out of the way so it doesn't kill anyone. That's all it does. It killed my parents and, various chickens." "What silliness are you talking about? Wait, how old are you, girl?" 19, this week." Suddenly the woman looked tired, or old, or sad. Her face sort of crumpled up into itself, and once again closed her eyes, became 2 lines in her face that rose up to almost meet above her nose. "You were right to come here," she said after a moment, opening her eyes again. We have much to discuss. But first, let's fill your bellies and then sit by the fire so we can sort this mess out. Take your boots off." She suddenly whacked the side of Flynn's foot with her cane. Not hard, just enough to make a point. But she grinned when she saw Rapunzel's bare feet. "Ah, child, you're like me. You like to feel the world around you." She wiggled her toes. Rapunzel found herself laughing, but couldn't tell if it was from the woman's simple delight or exhaustion bordering on hysteria. The next few minutes were filled with as much commotion as could fill such a tiny space. Gina's mother ordered people around, shaking her cane for emphasis. Flynn and Rapunzel were told to wash their faces and hands at a silver basin filled with cool, clear water. "Your scrying bowl, Ma?" Gina asked in surprise. The old woman shrugged. "We have guests. Hospitality trumps magic." Despite her excitement at the old woman's potential help with her hair and the lateness of the hour, and exhaustion from constant running, Rapunzel found herself stuffing her face. "The chivre's really good this time, Ma. What's the herb?" Gina asked. "Wild amaranth tips. Sea sip. Your old friend Carl picked it from the Fenton." Flynn grinned at Rapunzel over their meal. "Get a load of them," he seemed to say, cocking his head to the two women. Rapunzel smiled back, honey dripping out the side of her mouth. He reached over without thinking and dabbed it off with his finger. They both froze, looking at each other. Then Flynn coughed and went back to eating. As much as he wanted to hear what the old woman knew, perhaps the answers to all her questions and fears, Rapunzel wanted to bask in this moment just a little longer. The four of them eating and talking about nothing, well, Rapunzel had no idea what it was like. It was like nothing she had never experienced. A warm home on the ground, friendly people around a table talking. It was like her body instinctively longed for exactly this, despite never having seen it. Family, friends. All too soon dinner was over, and Rapunzel, and Flynn, once she kicked him, helped wash up and put the crockery away. I know, I'll make the tea," Gina said just as her mother opened her mouth. She turned to Rapunzel. "I'm not even going to bother telling you the choices. You have too many. I'll just brew up something that will hopefully ease your muscles a little and wake you up just enough for a talk around the fire." Flynn nudged Rapunzel. "See? Earth Goddess Mother tea stuff." She giggled, unsure what that meant, but glad to be in on a joke. The three young people sat on the floor, and the old lady in her chair. The tea Gina made tasted very vaguely of mint and hope, and really did wake Rapunzel up a little. She wondered why her own mother, a witch powerful enough to protect herself from the murder hare, never displayed any of these ever useful witchy skills, brewing magic tea, scrying the future, somehow getting roses to bloom indoors. This time, Rapunzel didn't make it even part way through her story. She had just described the tower when the old woman spat her tea out in surprise. "You lived as a prisoner for these past 2 decades, alone, behind stone walls, for what? What did they say you had done? Killed your own parents?" "But I wonder how much of this crime lies on my shoulders," she added quietly to herself. "Too slow, too lazy, unable to make decisions. Well, the evil is spread around, and in some way it may be mine, princess." "I am not a princess!" Rapunzel tried to keep her voice under control in deference to the old lady. She ground her teeth to keep from screaming. "But of course you are," the old lady said in mild surprise. "You are the crowned Princess Rapunzel, daughter of King Frederick and Queen Ariana, heir to the throne."